Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where today we're looking at more interesting input devices that I'll be showing off on a few Amigas, this being the month of Amiga and all. But as we'll see, some of them were designed with more platforms in mind. And we start with the Catron Stealth, that was released in 1991, and the box tells us that it features ergonomic design, fast action fire button, long gameplay comfort, high speed auto fire, and guaranteed for 5 million operations. Inside the box we get the controller itself, that I'm guessing got its name from its stealth fighter-like design. And it has 2 plugs, so it supports both the basic Atari standard and the Amstrad one. If we flip it over, we find 2 fire buttons, that we'll learn if they're independent or not when we get into a game. As we continue to look around, it's hard not to notice that there is no D-pad or any other obvious movement input, and when I bought this I was wondering if it was motion sensitive or not. And before I show you how this works, I'm going to plug it in, giving you a chance to guess how it works, and please put those guesses in the comments. Have you all guessed already? Well, it's time to show it off, and let's go with a platformer. And James Pond 2 has a nice empty area to start with, so we don't have to worry about getting killed straight away. And you can see me running around and jumping, but did you notice how it worked? If not, look at the right hand. To move forward, I have to pull it towards me. To jump, I have to rotate it up. To duck, rotate it down. And run backwards, I have to push it away from me. And I'm here to tell you, this breaks my brain. When you're trying to do all the regular actions at speed, it's so massively awkward. At no point do you really feel like you're in control. And trying to coordinate jumping with running and shooting and ducking, oh, it's just a mess. So let's see how bad it can really get by picking a fast-paced shooter. And well, I could barely make it 30 seconds into Battle Squadron. And that's with it having some really decent trigger buttons. They are really nice and chunky, and they have a very solid feel to them. It feels really satisfying to pull them, so they must have some really good micro switches inside. I could see that for a game that has the odd use of the fire button, this would be great. But anything that requires rapid shots, it would get tiring very fast. But it does have auto fire, which isn't the easiest switch to pull, but it does work well enough, and would really help with those more active games. Although due to the fact that both buttons do the same action, you could alternate between them if you really wanted to and didn't want to use the auto fire. I really have no idea what they were thinking when they made this. Even with a slower game like Battle Isle, it's still really clunky to use. If it was more of a regular stick and it had those micro switches for the directions, this could have been amazing. Or even if they stuck a D-pad on it, it might have been better. But pulling and pushing the handle, well, even just saying it sounds wrong. And let's see how it will handle a Wagglefest style game. So we're going to jump into the aquatic games. And this feels like I'm using some sort of exercise equipment. And the actions I had to pull to get a decent speed up, I'm not even sure I'm allowed to show this on YouTube. If I get demonetized, you'll know why. let's get on to the next stick, which is the Bishu Ink Zoomer. Now this came out around 1988, and I think we can safely say that this was designed with flight sims in mind. As not only does it rotate left and right, but it can also be pushed forward and back, as well as having two independent fire buttons. And what is a bit of a first for me when it comes to the Amiga, this is an analog controller, or at least it can be with this switch. And between that and the fact that it has the Commodore Amiga branding on it, makes this the single Amiga only input device that we've looked at. Even though I'm sure the digital side of it will work with any other Atari standard system, but I'm not sure about the analog side. But I think we should test out the digital mode first, and with another platformer. And this time it's Bart versus the Space Mutants. This was one of the first games I played when I got my Amiga 500 Plus. And I don't think it will really surprise anyone that this doesn't really go all that well with this game. But all the same, it does give us an idea of how far you need to move the yoke to get any input in the game. Or if it even tries to move without any direct input at all. Now there are a few wheels that you can turn to try and dial it in, but this is a rather old and worn down stick. I had to do some major repairs to get it even working to this degree. And there's some thick rubber bands that hold the whole thing together that are really wearing out. So keep that in mind. So let's jump to another game, something more in keeping with the stick. And we'll also have to go to another machine, as we'll need the extra CPU power for Frontier Elite 2. And this works, but I do think it's clear to say there are issues. You need to push a little bit too much in the directions for it to really pick up. And I can't really say that that would be the same if it was new, or if this is just down to its age. But you could use it, but I think we should move on to something else. Something that will really push the analog side of it, because that is what it was really designed for. So let's go with the classic Formula 1 Grand Prix, which deep in the options has a setting to enable analog input. And after calibrating it, we are off to the races. And even though this is a flight stick and not a steering wheel, it's quite nice here. It feels like it's responding correctly, or at least right compared to the digital mode. And the fire buttons, well, they're not really needed here at all. So it even has analog control over your speed as you push it forward to accelerate and back to brake. And all through this, I could really tell it was reacting to my small changes in the direction and the acceleration, and it really felt like what you'd expect from a wheel, or even using a modern controller. Now it might have been better if I could have used 2 fire buttons for accelerate and brake, but there might have been an option for that if I dug a little deeper. And I wonder if it does have that option, if I could pair it up with those foot pedals. That could make for a really good setup. Now you might be wondering why I've not been showing off just flight sims, as that is obviously what it was designed for. Well, the answer is in 2 parts. 1, I suck at flight sims. And 2, I did try a few, and the calibration screens didn't always work. As I would set it up, and then the plane would just start spinning around, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. I do wonder if all analog sticks were the same, or if some were slightly different enough that it just messes up some games. But one I did get to work was Red Baron. And I think we can see the analog, for the most part, is working quite well. Pushing forward and back didn't quite have the range I thought it would, but banking left and right seems spot on. And this does seem like the ideal way to play these type of games, as it does give you that control that you are missing otherwise. But obviously there are a few issues with this stick. It might be the fact that it's over 30 years old. It could be the fact that I had to use a lot of hot glue to rebuild some broken plastic. We might never know. Overall, it's a fine controller, even if it's one that's not massively supported in its analog mode. And I feel it's time we move on to the last controller for the video, and this is the Python 1M, which was made by Quickshot in 1991. And with the box that boasts about its ergonomic design, a bio grip, stabilizing suction cups, and 6 deluxe micro switches. This one is styled more like a typical flight controller, but it is purely digital. And it has 2 deluxe micro switch buttons on top, under your trigger finger and the thumb, and there's even an auto fire toggle that's easily accessible near the thumb. The micro switches in the directions do make for a nice change, as I've used quite a few sticks that came with leaf springs, rubber domes, or if you are very unlucky, just a bit of shaped metal that would be pushed around and make contact. But possibly one of the more interesting parts is underneath, as if we look under here we find a switch that changes the stick between 4 different modes. And these, as the label points out, are Atari, which can be used on many systems including the Amiga, the MSX for that line of computers, the Amstrad for the CPC and the Plus 2 and 3 Spectrums, and Sega mode, which will allow both buttons to be independent on the Sega Master System, but also the Amiga. Let's jump back into Bart vs the Space Mutants, and even using this left-handed, this controls the best we've seen today. The movement is mostly decent, with there being micro switches in all directions, although I would have preferred it if there was a little less movement, or more feedback when you move, as it feels a little loose, as there's a little bit too much play for my liking. But with the other joysticks we've seen, this might be an age thing more than anything else. But for the most part, you can hit all the points you need with ease. And something like Battle Squadron is again far more playable than with anything else we've seen today. Even using its southpaw, I was able to get past those first few ships, which is a definite plus, as this means that this can be used by either left or right-handed people. The bio grip just works. And with that auto fire toggle being quite convenient, really easy to enable for these sort of games that will really benefit from it. And having it stick to a surface also has its benefits as well, as it makes it much easier to play a game such as Walker, where you have to use the stick and a mouse at the same time, something that's almost impossible to do with the hold in your hand style joysticks, and it works really great here. But then all the stick really needs to do is be able to move left and right. Now let's try it with 2-button mode, and for this I've picked Flashback, as it has a few controller options including being able to use 2 buttons. And so having the stick set to Sega mode, we find that in game, the trigger button will now unholster and holster the gun, while the thumb now acts as your main fire button. And this is quite nice actually, as originally you had to hit the spacebar to bring out your weapon. Now, it doesn't quite eliminate the need for a keyboard, as F1 and return are still both needed for a few actions, but it does make the moment-to-moment gameplay so much smoother, which is a definite plus. And to round things out, I think we're going to have to return to the aquatic games. And we get to do that running on water with the left and right waggle. And I think it's fair to say that this wins out on the basic race, as not only did I come in first, the stick didn't break. Which I have to say happened to more than one stick back in the day while playing Daley Thompson's Decathlon. The bike race was also quite decent with the stick. Once I realised that the way you move is you have to sort of circle around the 4 directions, and fire is actually just a simple jump, not trying to get you to move. But that's just me not knowing the game very well. And with that, I get the feeling we've come to the end of this episode. So, not possibly the greatest set of controllers we've ever seen, but the last two I think have their uses. As I used to use controllers like the M1 all the time, it just didn't have that convenient config switch, so I could see me using this one far more often. That's if I'm not wanting to use the Speed King, which is my usual go-to. And the flight stick, if I manage to get it properly fixed up and replace those rubber bands, it could make for a really nice analog stick. And if you used any of these sticks in the past and have good or bad memories, let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. And so until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was the Zuma Stealth Python, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at a few interesting sticks in my collection. I do have a few more, and we've even looked at some in the past. So you can check out a link on the screen if you want to check that out. Or if you really enjoyed the video, then there should be buttons or a comment box below that you can use to let me know.